Okay, so it'd be a good place to start would be in terms of Stellium, for those that don't know, or even those that are familiar with the name, but not much more, a little bit of background, when the company was formed, why, and sort of progress to date.
Yeah, so Stellium, as we know it now, was formed in 2016. We're based in Newcastle, so we're based on Cobalt Business Park, which is one of the largest business parks in the UK. And really, we were set up to become, a powerhouse of out-of-town data centres, much like NGD in South Wales or, KO Park, etc. We see the movement really of organisations coming out of London for a number of reasons. And we see Newcastle as a fantastic place for that, for a number of reasons which we'll go into. But, we've got a lot of available power up here, a fantastic workforce. You've got some, huge organisations based up here, people like Sage, Nissan, Ubisoft. So I think you're seeing more and more organisations come up here. And one of the reasons really is the universities up here. The kind of heads that you have, the organisations that require data centre services have. And so I think, it was something that the North East needed, really. A very large data centre with great connectivity.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, that's the sort of obvious follow-up is why the North East and Newcastle. And I think CBRE have recently published a report that doesn't talk specifically about the North East, but the north of England. So, what's you've alluded to some of the things that are going on, but specifically for data centres, what's good about the area in Newcastle?
Well, look, I think areas like Newcastle previously were bastions of hard industry. You had a lot of steel, you had mining, etc. So you've got the infrastructure here for power. We're also very lucky that Stellium is the only subsea cable landing station in the UK, and not all data centres have the ability to do that, and that's really due to our proximity to the coast here in Newcastle. But I think you're seeing more and more organisations, as I mentioned before, coming up to Newcastle. It's the labour pool's cheaper, the land is cheaper, it's a better quality of life for people. From my experience of working for data centre providers in London and larger cities, there is a lack of power, there is a lack of space, and it's also ended up there's a lack of heads that work within the data centre, i.e. engineering. The prices have gone up in London, and as we all know, power prices have gone up, and I think organisations now look to see where they can cut costs, and whether that be on the the actual space of the data centre, or some of the other kind of things that we provide, which is meter billing, example, for every customer, which in London, really only happens with the larger customers. So I think it's, it was time for organisations like Stellium to come into the North East, and I'm sure you're going to see many more. You're looking at the, Leeds, Manchester becoming, larger hubs of data centres and technology. With Media City in Manchester, and I can see that moving up, and here in Newcastle, as I say, we've got a number of universities, Newcastle, Durham, Teesside, etc. And there's some fantastic people up here, and traditionally those people had trained or schooled here and then moved down to London, to work in industries that they would like to, and that's something we'd like to help stop. And I think you're going to see large organisations move into places like Newcastle in the future.
And in terms of connectivity, you mentioned the subsea cable sort of landing spot, but I'm just wondering, because everyone traditionally thinks London's the great place to be for all the connectivity reasons, but what does Newcastle offer? And I'm wondering, for example, your proximity to the Nordics, where a lot of stuff's going on at the moment, if that's an advantage. And also, if I sort of a part two, what other service, obviously there's connectivity, but what other services do you wrap around, the data center offering?
So we've been very forward thinking in what we've done at Stellium, and I'd like to think of Stellium as a data centre of the future. And as we all know, a data centre without connectivity is not really a data centre. So we've worked very hard on one, attracting nearly all the major regional suppliers into Stellium. So the Zaos, the Colts, the Lumens, BT, you name it, have a presence in Stellium now. And secondly, as you mentioned, the subsea cable landing station is very important. So, Aquacom's drops in here in a secure data center, as does the NO-UK cable, as you mentioned, going into the Nordics. And what does that offer? Well, from Newcastle now, it's a lower latency than London to New York, for example. We're also seeing a number of organisations utilising the Nordics for the cheap energy, cheap renewable energy. And we've got the fastest link in there as well. So I think what you're going to see, sadly, due to the current geopolitical situation, is more and more organisations wanting to land their cable in a secure data centre. I think most people that have worked in telecoms know that a lot of the cable landing stations normally come up onto a beach, you know, in a small shed with some chicken wire around it. I don't think that is going to be the security requirements of the large organisations that now run those cables, which are, you know, the Googles, Facebooks of this world. It used to be the conglomerates of telecom companies that would do it. I think the organisations now that are running the cables are really concentrating on the security of not only where the cable lands, but also where their compute sits as well. And it makes Stellium you know, a viable proposition for that.
And in terms of the customers you're attracting, what sort of mix have you got? I'm assuming you do cater to a lot of regional businesses because of the proximity, but again, I think the CBRE report mentioned that, you know, what you're offering is suitable for the hyperscalers. So what, you know, again, I know you can't necessarily reveal names and stuff, but what's your customer profile, I guess, is the simple way of it.
So it's a real mixture, and you're exactly right that to build a data center is very expensive. To build a data center of Stellium scale is extremely expensive. To, you know, to put the connectivity and the energy that we have coming in here is a huge investment for any organisation. So there's a number of organisations that operate within Newcastle that serve the local customer base here, you know, whether that's large enterprise or the smaller organisations. And they utilise Stellium as their primary data centre, purely because of the connectivity we have out of here, the size and the scale and the way that we run a data centre. It makes it an obvious choice for those organisations to come in and put their customers here. A number of those organisations also have their own data centres, so they use their data centres as resilient, ends or resilient data centres, BN data centres. So there's a real mixture of organisations that come in under those organisations, those managed service providers that operate here. Secondly, a lot of organisations come into Stellium directly, so we're more than happy to take universities, take the larger customers up here that are looking for co-location or are looking for co-location and connectivity. And thirdly, look, we're built really for the hyperscalers as well. There's not many data centers left that can pull in the kind of capacity that Stellium can. So at the moment, we're contracted for 80 megawatts. We can scale that up here to 230 megawatts, through some changes and some infrastructure planning here. But over the next 2 years, we could scale that up to 230 megawatts, as I say, which is a huge amount of power. We also have a huge amount of space here. We're in a very secure and safe location. So that really attracts the kind of customers, the global customers that we have, as well as the local customers that we have. We're very accessible from Newcastle. And so, yeah, as I say, I think from any organisation that operates in Newcastle or nearby, Stellium is definitely on their map as a data centre of choice.
And in terms of the industry sectors, because I know some colo facilities have deliberately designed ecosystem, if you like, industry ecosystem, so they encourage, whether it's the media industry or the finance industry, because it's a lot easier to and quicker to do trade within the same data center as opposed to hopping around the place. Is that something you're already doing or looking at doing?
Yeah, no, it is, and 100% right. We are seen as really a resilient route for some of the quant traders, the algo traders, or just finance houses. So they look at us and see us as a fantastic resilient route, either to the USA or to the Nordics. So we're seeing a lot of interest from those organisations now looking to put something in Newcastle to utilise the connectivity we've got. And I think that's, you know, that really shows the forward thinking of Stellium from a telecoms angle, and not only a colocation angle. We're also seeing a lot of interest from content delivery networks and other organizations because of the secure cable landing station here, because of cables landing within this data center. It cuts down the costs for them. It enhances the security of their service and their cables, or the, you know, so their service and their network. And also, you know, interest from hyperscale customers, because again, utilizing those cables, utilizing the security of Stellium, we're starting to see a lot of interest from you know, organizations all over, from every industry really.
Yeah, and we can't, I mean, in this day and age, we can't talk about data centers without mentioning the topic of sustainability. So I'm also interested in what you have built so far that, yeah, has sustainability in mind, and whether you feel under pressure to do it, obligation, or, you know, things you actually want to do in terms of further developing sustainable. And I mean, I guess we're talking everything from renewable energies to how much you do or don't monitor, you know, scopes 1, 2, and 3, stuff like that. Just give us a picture of where sustainability is in terms of Stellium's focus.
Well, look, you know, from my experience in data centers, the kind of organizations that we want to attract won't even come to your doorstep if you can't show that you're using renewable or sustainable energy. Again, it's one of the fantastic reasons or one of the fantastic things of being here in Newcastle. We've got a number of offshore wind farms here. So Dogger Bank is going to be the largest offshore wind farm. And that's going to bring in 3 times 12 gigawatts of power. That comes online, I think, later this year or early next year. But you've also got Blythe at the moment, another wind farm that produces around 40 megawatts of power. But look, you know, like all data centers, we have to prove and show to our customers that the energy that we're utilizing is sustainable and renewable. And so we go through the, you know, all the hoops and hurdles that any other data center would to prove that sustainability to our customers. And I think, you know, it's a topic that's not going away. I think there's going to be certain areas in the country, or, you know, in certain cities around the world that are going to really struggle to provide 100% renewable energy in large cities, just due to the crisis that we're in at the moment. And so I think, you know, working towards you know, a reduction in carbon within the data center in various forms, and I'm probably not the best person to talk to about that. I look through the window and see my operations director, who on a daily basis looks at how we can really, you know, cut our carbon footprint here in the data center and help our customers and provide that. So, you know, there's a number of initiatives that are underway, whether that be solar panels here on the roof, or, as I say, that, you know, the wind farms really delivering huge amounts of sustainable energy into Newcastle and the northeast. So that's something that Stellium, you know, will continue to follow, you know, and will continue to ensure that we provide that renewable and sustainable energy. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It's a hot topic, and it should be a hot topic. So, you know, from a customer perspective, we do everything we can to provide that. So, you know, things like REGO, the renewable energy guarantee of origin, that allows us to show our customers, you know, exactly where that energy is coming from. It allows us to understand our sustainability and prove that to our customers.
And in terms of, I mean, you already explained how much, you know, more power you can bring online, so you've got significant room for expansion. Do you have what sort of, I guess, what does the roadmap look like in terms of, you know, how long you think it might take to do that? And also I'm wondering, I mean, it may not matter to you, but do you see yourself, I mean, typically anything that's not in a sort of capital city or a major, you know, sort of, shall we say, finance center, tends to be reviewed as regional or edge. How would you characterize, or, you know, does it matter what you're called, or you know, how do you see yourselves moving forward?
Look, not really. And the reason that I joined Stellium was because I understand this industry and understand that organizations are going to have to move out of large cities at one point. You know, whether that's tomorrow or in 5 years' time, but it's happening. I was part of the team at NGD, which is now Vantage down in Wales, and you know, and a similar story. So, you know, In Wales, it's now the home to one of the largest hyperscalers in the world, and really is their USB stick in Europe. And why did they go there? They went there because the space was cheaper. They found a cheaper labour pool. They're away from the larger cities, which comes with its own security and what would you call it? Defence issues in a sense. And so I think that organisations are going to have to move out if they want the power and they want the space and they want to be there for a long while. They have to look at a data centre or a site that they can grow into, whether it's space and power or both. It's very difficult to do in some London data centres. If you've got 15 or 20 megawatts, it's difficult for an organisation like that to grow in scale and size there. If you can deliver 230 megawatts, those organisations look at you and say, well, we could be there for 10 years. We grow into it. We've got the space, we've got the power, and we can make it our home. And so to answer your question about the power and how long would it take, I mentioned before, we currently deliver 80 megawatts into this site. It would take us some infrastructure transformation within our site, which would probably take us a year to 18 months to upgrade that to 230 megawatts. So we're using a substantial amount of that 80 megawatts at the moment. And so, as our forecast and pipeline grows, we would look at potentially expanding that, that power up, probably to 120 megawatts first, and then over that. But I think what attracts large customers to places like Stellium is the fact that they can grow, they can scale up. And as we've mentioned, renewable energy, security of a landing station, it's a number of factors that the organisations look at and say, well, yes, look, we can grow into that site in the next 5, 7, 10 years. And I think that's important to attract the kind of customers that data centres need to attract now.
And do you think that there is now a growing awareness and actual, a lot of companies are beginning to understand? I mean, once upon a time, at least, your data center had to be, inside or just on the M25 because you had to be, close to it to access it when you need to. All that. Are people getting much more comfortable with the idea that your data center can be further, a little bit further away from you for all the advantages you've explained? And I earlier I said about the Nordic. Nordic seems to be gaining a lot of traction because people have worked out, renewable energy, cheap power, etc. So I guess I'm saying our end users are becoming much more educated as to where many of their applications can reside. They don't actually have to be, within half an hour of headquarters or something like that. Yeah,
I know. I completely agree with you, and I don't think organisations anymore, smaller organisations at least, don't have to be as close to it. We do something here with one of our partners, which is they're an organisation here, a large MSP in the northeast. They have 100 to 120 engineers here. So I use those guys when larger customers come up and say, look, it's difficult for us to touch the steel or get to the server quickly. We utilise organisations like that if they want to provide a real service wrap or some management around it. Other than that, within Stellium, we have remote hands 24/7, 365. So we can deal with those kind of requests. And I think you're seeing customers being able to do a lot more of the work, logging into their equipment, remotely, being able to make changes, etc. And they can utilise our staff here for swaps or, power downs, whatever that may be. But again, to go back to your question about edge data centres, I think organisations are going to have to start to deal with that, because if we see edge explode, as we all talk about, and we've been talking about for a number of years now, then organisations will have to get used to not being as close to their equipment, and find ways of being able to maintain that and utilise organisations that work, within those areas to help them achieve that. Now, that's very difficult for some of the larger hyperscale customers, purely because they employ their own staff, very high security levels. But again, as I mentioned, you've got universities here that are training some very intelligent people that are the kind of people that hyperscalers want. And traditionally, these people have moved to London or larger cities to work for these organisations. But I think as I've seen, you know, in previous roles, these organisations now go out locally to try and find people there. They understand the benefits of data centres like Stellium: size, scale, connectivity, security. And so employing people is not the hard part of this journey now, I don't think. People are happy to live in places like Newcastle. You know, I travel up here from London, and it's almost like coming to Monaco every week. It's a lot more relaxed, it's a lot quieter, you know, life is a lot easier and slower, housing's cheaper, schools are better. And so I think that natural progression of organisations finding staff in places like Newcastle or Wales is not difficult. And so it goes back to your question about people having to be close to things. I think that's changing, and I think organisations realise that has to change.
And it might seem a little bit sort of greedy to ask, bearing in mind you've still got quite a large amount of capacity, you know, in Newcastle. But with an eye to the future, are you actively looking, you know, to open up to acquire other sites to grow the company, say elsewhere, or is Newcastle very much going to keep you occupied for the foreseeable future?
I would say Newcastle will keep us occupied for the foreseeable future. And the reason why is Stellium's one of the largest campuses in England. We have 3 Stelliums here on site. I'm sitting here now in one of them. It's one of our live sites. And we've got 2 other buildings next door to us, so one either side of me now. Cookie cutter, exactly the same. So this campus is very, very big, and it's almost 3 data centres on one site. So we are, you know, completing our first site now. I can see us moving into our second site within the next year or 2 years. But to answer your question, no, I don't think at the moment Stellium are actively looking for new sites. I think we want to make Stellium in Newcastle a powerhouse of connectivity, a powerhouse of space and power, from a data center perspective. So we've got a lot of work to do here, to build up the customer base and build up the ecosystem and continually keep to build on what we've done already, which is, you know, cable landing stations, rich connectivity, and huge amounts of space and power. That's really what we concentrate on.
Yeah, and I know if we were to sort of summarize, maybe a bit of advice for people who are looking at this issue of maybe moving away, either from doing their own stuff, so moving for the first time to colo, or even, you know, they're in a colo in a particular location and thinking, you know, it might be time to move further from, say, typically if they're in the southeast. What would you sort of say they should look out for? And to that point, how would you characterize, you know, in what's quite a competitive market, why Stellium would, you know, stand out from some of those other options?
Look, I think one of the things we do here, and I've worked for large, you know, London-based data centres, and traditionally smaller customers were, I would say, we're not treated as the larger ones. Okay, so meter billing was something that was only really given to large multi-megawatt customers. That's pretty standard in London. Stellium will meter bill every customer, so you pay for what you use. I think that's quite unique, because as organisations look to try and save money on you know, space or power, or which they are, you know, we don't know what way the energy prices are going, and so trying to save money wherever you can, I think, is very important at the moment. The second thing is that a lot of London data centres, and not all obviously, but a lot of London data centres are getting old now. You know, we're having a lot of new developments, but there's a lot of old data centres that struggle to provide the kind of power that customers require now. So I've worked in data centres that may struggle to provide 5 kilowatts a rack. Here at Stellium, we can provide up to 50 kilowatts a rack. And so that really puts us in the, you know, the world of high performance computing. What we're seeing from artificial intelligence moving forward, you know, what will the landscape be? I don't think any of us really know at the moment, but we do know that we're going to see some power intensive applications. You know, the layout of data centers may also change with things like submersive cooling. It's something that organizations have to be aware of, that not all data centers are, you know, can change and fit. Stellium's a very modern site, and we understand that we're going to attract some large customers. that have some bespoke requirements. And I think even for smaller customers, understanding that, you know, a connectivity rich data center away from, you know, the major city zones. And again, it's a sad thing to say, but I think organizations have to be aware of a number of factors, especially around places like Slough. You know, it's next to Heathrow Airport, and it's in a very high crime rate. I mean, many years ago, organizations didn't really think like that, but we're in a different world now. And I think security is going to be paramount to most organizations, or large organizations, from a connectivity standpoint and from a, you know, a data center standpoint. And that comes down to, you know, location. It comes down to the way that the data center manages its security. And I think it shows Stellium, you know, really being a shining light, the only cable landing station in the country or within a data center. You know, I think it's a credit to Stellium, and it shows you where the market's moving. I think very quickly that to be able to utilize the kind of facilities we have here from a telecoms perspective and a security perspective are paramount to organizations. So I think, you know, if organizations want to save money, want to look at the, you know, the future proofing of their infrastructure or their deployments, they're going to have to start looking at organizations like Stellium, you know, to get out of the larger, you know, the larger city zones, which may be limited in space, maybe limited in power, maybe limited in employee resources.
Okay, I mean, we've covered some good ground there, and some great insights and information. So Ed, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thanks.